Hello, my name is Nibras Kazimi. I would like to tell you about uh, my idea for the History of Islam project, why it's personally important to me, and why I believe it's unique and necessary at this juncture. I've been around the narratives of revolution, sectarianism, ethnic identity, war for most of my life. My parents come from different backgrounds. My father is an Arab Shiite from Baghdad. My mother is a Sunni Kurd from Kirkuk. They met as young cadres of the Iraqi Communist Party. They were revolutionaries, idealists. They set out to change their world. And they paid their dues: prison, exile, harassment, and it was, the ethos, their generation's ethos was egalitarian. We're going to cast away all that baggage of identity. Their comrades were from all sorts of backgrounds, diverse Iraqi backgrounds: Arabs, Kurds, Turkoman, Persians, Jews, Christians, Mandeans. But growing up, that sort of friction between identities lingered. I'd remember my father would get the morning newspapers, and he'd pick one up, and my mother would pick another one up. My father would start going through the newspaper, and he'd find something that is somewhat negative about Kurds. He'd say, "Oh, this is interesting," and he'd proceed to read it out loud. My mother would retaliate by shuffling through her newspaper, finding a story that is somewhat negative about Iran, and she'd proceed to read it out loud too. So, from an early age, I was exposed to these conflicting narratives and the confusion that comes with that. For college, I come here to the US. I go to Brandeis. It was the mid 90s, after Oslo, Arab Israeli conflict, peace process, being from the Middle East, lots of conversations, dorm rooms, cafeteria, library, throughout my college years. And in my senior year, I gathered together a group of people who I had interesting conversations with. And we'd meet at my place for tea and snacks and discussions. It was informal. I think it was at the first or the second time we met, myself and an Arab Israeli were making the case that Israel is an expansionist state. And we're citing as evidence, look at the flag. Those two blue lines are the Nile and the Euphrates, and Israel seeks to expand across that whole territory. There were two Israelis with us, and they had this puzzled look on their face. What are you guys talking about? We respond, everybody knows it's right there on the flag. I mean, everybody knows, that kind of thing. They'd say, no, that has nothing to do with the Nile and the Euphrates, those two blue lines. That's the design is inspired from the prayer shawl that Jewish worshippers would wear around their waists. I remember going to myself, that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you do have a secret conspiratorial plan to expand, you're not going to advertise it on your flag. And the design thing makes sense. I mean, maybe at the time I wasn't completely sold on their explanation, but I felt compelled that if I had a box file of certainty in my mind, I had to take that dossier regarding the flag from that box file and put it in another mental box file, a box file of doubt, question marks, to be determined. That experience was important for me, because calling into question certainties, things that I had always heard growing up in the Middle East, schooling, amongst friends. That's what this meant from the media. That's what their flag meant. I mean, that's unassailable, or at least it was in my mind. After college, inspired by my parents, even though they weren't very happy about it, I joined a revolution that I believed in, which was a revolution to overthrow Saddam Hussein. 2003, we're in Baghdad. We're euphoric. There's an aura of redemption about us. We did it. We have our country back. Now we're going to build slowly and begin to heal the wounds that have accumulated over decades. And we're all in this together, and this is a unique and great opportunity. Then, in my peripheral vision, I could see some movement. This was the jihadists, and with every passing day, they would come closer into focus. I was looking at that, and I remember going, "Oh, I understand what this is all about." Understanding here does not connote sympathy. They were the enemy as far as I was concerned, but I understood that what they're talking about, what they're doing, might work for them, because it's going to influence the generation that I was part of. It was compelling. I could see how it was compelling, and I began to study them. I felt that what they're about to do was going to be big, not just big for Iraq, big for the region. Going back to my high school days, I had a friend. He was intelligent, talented, bold, chivalrous, brave, but an oddball, a complete oddball. I mean, one of the things that he'd do, for example, he'd come to class with a cactus thorn and sit down, and during class he'd find a place in his eyelid and start poking himself with that thorn, and the teacher would freak out, and she'd go, "Rami, what?" His name was Rami. "What are you doing, Rami?" And Rami would answer something like, "I'm training myself not to break under torture." Okay, he was my friend. He had a lot of redeeming qualities, and he was an oddball. Throughout the years that I was studying the jihadists, I'd ask myself, Rami, I lost touch with him. He went into some sort of seclusion. He didn't talk to anybody from his past. He studied IT in the UK, and then went to Beirut. Last we heard, he had turned to religion, and joined a Sufi order that was an oddball Sufi order, much like himself. But I kept thinking to myself, thinking back to Rami, about Rami, and I'd ask myself, what would it take for the jihadist revolution to recruit Rami or somebody like Rami? Because if they do, then they're bringing a talent to the fight that is different. It's a paradigm shift from what we had seen before. They're bringing in a type of person that can be the mid-level management, and possibly later a leader of a grand state project, a bold political, social, revolutionary vision with a blueprint for for the future. Let's imagine a young Middle Eastern woman. Let's call her Maryam, and let's imagine what's happening to her right now. She's being bombarded with so much information, with so many conflicting narratives. I mean, it's that little kid watching his parents with the newspapers by magnitudes of tens, yes. And there's media, there's satellite, there's internet. A lot of it is coming at Maryam. And Maryam, you know, it's 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 a lot. It's a lot to digest, and a lot has been happening over the last decade and a half in the Middle East. And Maryam might be exposed to the jihadist message or propaganda, and she would have this reaction, this human reaction, rejection of. I mean, what she's getting from him is shocking. It's jarring. It's ugly. It's the victims that she sees. It's up close and personal. These are faces. They're not faceless statistics. These are people being beheaded. She hears about slavery. She hears about destruction of culture, of civilization, civilizational artifacts, archaeology. And she wants to reject this. She has a reaction born out of empathy, born out of just she knows this is wrong, and she wants to push back. She wants to say something. There's a problem. The jihadists, extremists generally, are empowered by a unique tool in this context. They can turn to Maryam and say, Maryam, you might feel squeamish about all of this. You might not think it's okay. But, we're just going by the book. You see this book right here? This book, ink on paper, says that the last time around, when our people recaptured glory, made the nations of the earth kneel at their feet, found redemption, regained their dignity, was through this recipe book, these actions that they took. What we're doing is we're following these actions. We're going back to a true and tested recipe for glory, for pushing back against what you've been hearing about for decades of malice and conspiracy and people who are out to get Muslims or Arabs or people of the Middle East generally. And you can't argue with clarity. It's right there. It's cold ink on lifeless paper, and it's there. What can Maryam do? How can she counter? She can't deny that it's there. It is there. She can't reject it because, and it's not just the jihadists who will come after her. It's conservative elements in society. Society as a whole would shun her, if not worse. I maintain that there's a third approach that Maryam can take in order to push back. And that is legitimately raising doubts about this book, about the veracity, accuracy, authenticity of this ink on paper. And luckily, all that hard work, all that investigation has already been accomplished. For 200 years, scholars, Western scholars, for the most part, at European universities, later at American universities, began applying methodological means of critiquing Islamic historiography. And this was not unique. They were applying the same tools developed to study Judaism and Christianity and this historiography there to Islam. Many years back, we put the label of Orientalists to describe these scholars of the history of Islam and the texts of Islam. And Orientalism is a negative connotation now in the public mind, in the West and in the Middle East. However, who were these people? Who were these scholars? Sure, there were some who were motivated by colonial agendas, racial agendas. Some of them were motivated by malice. They felt in competition. They were faithful Christians or Jews who were faithful and wanted to push back against Islam or saw Islam as an enemy of some sorts. These people were there, but they're marginal. The majority of the people who took on this task, and you had to be very determined, very tenacious to do this. I mean, learning, for example, Arabic, a difficult language, finding these manuscripts, translating these manuscripts into English, Dutch, French, Russian, German, and then studying them and getting into all sorts of debates with others who are doing. These are eccentrics who go down this path. People who are really motivated by a passion for knowledge. They just wanted to know, for the most part. But we can also demonstrate that they were the majority. And through books, through papers, through symposia, through lectures, that scholarly debate, that fleshing out of all these ideas, manifested itself. And it's geeky. It's gorgeously geeky. I mean, these are scholars and nitpickers and eccentrics who are going, no, this contradicts that. No, you're mistaken. No, look at this source and the time you got the timeline wrong here. Scholars, true scholars, and they created some magisterial works, fantastic tomes of real, deep, serious study, respectful of the sources and respectful of the topic that they were studying. A lot of them, until today, reach a point where they go, you know what? We just won't know exactly what happened. There's no certainty there. That's the nature of history, the study of history, with the available source materials. When they go to these same books that the jihadists cite and study them, really study them, and deconstruct timelines, deconstruct arguments, deconstruct contradictions, they get to this feeling of this intellectual angst of, we just won't know for certain until new evidence presents itself, a new manuscript comes to light, archaeology, something, but we just won't know. So their box file of doubt, of to be determined, is overflowing. That moment of angst, that moment of intellectual doubt, we can capture that and empower Maryam to use it, to speak it, to write it, and put it out there. And we hope that complexity, that doubt, will make Rami hesitate in taking that snap decision of going from wherever he's at towards the jihadist ranks. In a sense, what I'm describing here is a boutique form of CVE, countering violent extremism. It's targeting a particular type of talent that the extremists, both Sunni and Shia, as they gear up for this big civilizational battle, big grand state ventures, redrawing of maps, redrawing of resetting history, as they go towards that, and they would need the type of talented mid-level leadership like Rami. We want Rami to hold back, not take that snap decision of going over to the other side. Now, the problem set. The problem set is that content, the scholarly works of 200 years of academic research and critiques and debates, that is not available online. And when it is available, it is rarely available in languages spoken, discussed, used, written with in the Middle East: Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, Kurdish. I propose we need to change that. We need to figure out how exactly the extremists are using history to bolster, justify, and augment their case for why they're doing what they're doing, why they're saying what they're saying, and their vision for the future. They're using historical precedent. We need to figure out exactly what these precedents that work to their advantage, that are already out there in the consciousness of a lot of Middle Eastern populations. For example, like that flag with the two lines, and the way they use those certainties and hack into those certainties and turn them into their own. We need to figure out what is the scholarly work that's been already accomplished that best addresses, critiques, raises questions and doubts about these historical precedents as chronicled and described by the Muslim historiographers and historians of early Islam, specifically. And the process is helped that there's a distance of time between when the events occurred, the life of Muhammad, the early companions, the caliphs, and when it was chronicled and written about and put ink to paper. There's 150 to 200 year lag for most of these works that the jihadists cite. So we're not raising doubts about Muhammad or the Quran or the early companions or the caliphs. We need to ask ourselves the question, how could a historian or a chronicler 6 generations after the events took place, how can he get it right? Maryam needs to ask this question. And Maryam has room to raise doubt. So she doesn't have to reject, she can't deny, but she has room to raise doubt, because these doubts, there's a rich Islamic tradition of raising doubts about the veracity of these accounts as they're written down. It's been going on for centuries, and that's why we have all these multiple sects that have abounded across time and space. Let's empower Maryam with that content. Let's make it available, easy to find, searchable for her, in languages that she uses to express, to write, to think, to study. Maryam is probably does not have the opportunity to quickly become a scholar of Islam. What's been tried and should continue to be tried is that a lot of countering the extremist narrative for now has been to call in moderate scholars, Muslim theologians and scholars, and have them make a case to Maryam, no, the interpretation of this text, as the jihadists are saying, is wrong. The jihadists come back and say, you work for the Saudis, you work for Azhar, you work for the Turkish government. You don't have credibility because you're part of a corrupt edifice that is part of the problem. That we're launching this revolution against primarily. And this resonates with Maryam because a lot of young people in the Middle East are uncomfortable with how things are. So that approach may be limited. And the problem is because the jihadists, theirs is the most simplistic, literal readout of the text, then in such cases, the people with the simplest, clearest message win. So another approach is, let's forget the ink on paper. Let's look at who put that ink on paper, and it's not the hollow religious figures. These are human beings, chroniclers and historians who are writing this 150, 200 years after the events took place. I mean, it's a simple question to ask people. Do you remember what happened last Tuesday? What did you eat? What happened? Do you remember something in the news? Were there conflicting accounts of what happened? Now imagine telling them, what do you think you know about what happened on a Tuesday 150 years ago? And are you how credible of an account, how authentic and legitimate of an account can you render in writing about in reporting about what happened? So this is a massive project. It's civilizational in scope. You're taking scholarly work, output of one civilization that developed tools for the study of history, and you're grafting it on another civilization. And this is, this has happened before in history in reverse. It was translators and scholars in Baghdad digesting the manuscripts and works of the Greeks and the Aramaics, and taking things that they need to learn from these manuscripts, especially in the sciences, but also being influenced by philosophy and all these things. And then that, of course, that material was grafted one civilization to another, and it gets to Europe by being grafted from the Muslim lands, from Baghdad, onto Europe in later centuries. So we're just going back and forth in this process. And because it's a massive structure, it will involve the cooperation, the collaboration of lots of people and entities. And for the most part, I personally would like it to be democratic. I would like it to be open on a volunteer basis of people who would want to do these translations on their own, who have the platforms where they can meet and find this information if they go out looking for it. And it would be up to them. It would be up to Maryam to choose what to do with this material. She can, for example, see that the jihadists are citing a particular historical precedent to justify something that they're doing. She'll go back to the content. Once we make it available, she'll find something there and use that to argue back. She can dial up the controversy, dial it down, depending on her circumstances, depending on how far she wants to push the envelope. But it's her decision. It's democratic. So in this massive structure, I believe we can help the process along by building a scaffolding around it, where we, others, volunteers, can come and help us construct the content and make it available for people. And it's not available. It's not available. Not rarely, even in the languages such as English, Dutch, Russian, German, French, that they were authored in. We need to make it available. We need to help people read it, understand it, discuss it, and we need to find a way whereby we empower those who want to cite it, use it in whichever way they want, in their words, to their peers, put it out there. That's the gist of the History of Islam project. It's an idea that I've been thinking about for a number of years. I believe it's unique, at least at this scope, at this size. It hasn't been tried before, and I really believe it's necessary at this juncture. It's one of the ways we should be pushing back against extremist narratives. It's not a substitute for all the other stellar efforts that are being made. That should continue. People who want to mock, that's going to influence, who want to mock the caliph, who want to mock other extremists, that's going to influence a certain market segmentation of the target audience. However, I'm thinking about Maryam, I'm thinking about Rami, I'm thinking about how to deny the jihadists the ability to recruit Rami, and I want Maryam to draw them to a battlefield that is advantageous to her. It's not the clarity that they espouse, and it's not, they can't, if Maryam raises doubts, they can't brand her as a heretic, because all she's doing is raising doubts, and it's perfectly acceptable in the Islamic tradition to do that. And the jihadists, the extremists, would have to come, both Sunni and Shia, would have to come to this battlefield that is advantageous to Maryam and argue. And it will get to the point for a lot of reasonable people that we just won't know for certain. There's no certainty here. There's too much contradiction, there's too much noise, and complexity. And complexity is the enemy of the extremists, the antidote to the clarity of their message. And I hope we can get it done. We can begin. Let's build this.